My daughter-in-law slammed a mop across my back and called me worthless. My son just stood there, not saying a word. That same night, I walked out of their house with nothing but a suitcase and bruises I didn't bother to count. Once upon a time, I built something out of nothing: smoke, ribs, and grit. But to them, I was just an old woman taking up space. They figured I'd go quietly. What they didn't understand is that women like me have already walked through worse. I used to wake up to the smell of brisket slow smoking and cornbread rising in the oven. Now I wake to the sound of heels on tile and a silence so sharp it cuts. My name is Virginia Eastwood. I'm 73 years old, and I live in a house where no one says my name. Not with kindness, not with memory, not with the respect I earned. They call it theirs now, Brendan and Haley. But that down payment came from my retirement fund. The same kitchen where I once slow-roasted pork belly for 5 hours is now the place I wash dishes without a thank you. That morning, I sat at the far end of the oak dining table, the same table Brendan used to crawl under pretending to be a tiger when he was 5. Now he sits across from me in starched collars and silence. Haley, all polished and perfect, set her avocado toast down and didn't even glance my way. She didn't ask if I'd eaten. Nobody did. The wall behind them used to be full of photos. Me and Brendan at our first food truck. Brendan at the state fair, his face smeared with barbecue sauce. Me accepting an award for women entrepreneurs over 50. Now all of it's gone. Replaced by a bland canvas print of Napa Valley that smells like lavender and detachment. That night at dinner, Haley scrolled her phone and laughed. Brendan chuckled, too. I sat quietly. I had made cornbread. No one touched it. Haley moved arugula around her plate and asked Brendan how the new seasonal menu was being received. I didn't need to be the center of anything, but it's a strange kind of loneliness, sitting invisible in a kitchen you once ruled. That evening, I stood alone in the pantry. My fingers brushed the spice jars I labeled decades ago. Paprika, garlic powder, ancho chili. Each worn lid felt like an old friend. I remembered the night Brendan helped me crush black peppercorns for our brisket rub. He was 16, full of ambition, told me he wanted to go to culinary school. I cried that night. Now I cry without sound. I know some of you understand this ache. That slow fade where love turns to mere tolerance. Where your seat at the table feels borrowed. If you've ever felt yourself disappearing from the life you built, you're not alone. That night, I didn't say a word. But something inside me shifted. The kind of stillness that comes before everything changes. I wasn't angry yet, but I started remembering who I used to be. And when a woman like me remembers, that's when the storm begins. The following weekend, Haley threw what she called a casual networking brunch. I stayed in the background that morning, wiping down counters, folding dish towels, staying out of the way. Part of me hoped someone might ask me for help in the kitchen. No one did. Brendan came downstairs in a crisp polo that looked like it had never seen grease. He didn't say hello, just grabbed the lighter and headed for the back patio to start the grill. I stood behind the sliding glass door, out of the way but still watching. The guests started trickling in, men in khakis, women in soft florals, voices floating in on the breeze. Haley glided around in a pale pink dress, barefoot, holding a glass of rose like it was part of the costume. She looked like she had practiced how to look effortless. Every smile was for show. Then she turned toward me and waved her hand. "This is Virginia," she said. She worked at the restaurant before we rebranded. A few heads turned politely. One man raised an eyebrow and asked if I used to be a chef. Before I could speak, Haley jumped in. She was more like background support, part of the family vibe, you know. I gave a tight smile. Brendan stood by the grill flipping asparagus with the wrong end of the tongs. He didn't meet my eyes, just popped open a beer like nothing was happening. I walked back inside with my heart heavy in my chest. I picked up a jacket someone had left on a chair and headed for the closet. That's when I saw the photo wall. All new ski trips, gala nights, vacation snaps. All Brendan and Haley. The photo of me and Brendan at the food truck's grand opening was gone. I remembered that day like yesterday, sweating through 16 hours, then still dancing up close with my son. But to them, that picture no longer mattered. I went to my room and opened the drawer where I kept old clippings, awards, and press photos. I didn't take anything out. I just looked. The paper edges peeking out were proof that I had existed before they decided I didn't. Part of me wanted to take one to the fridge like a child with a report card, but I didn't. I shut the drawer and sat on the edge of the bed. Downstairs, laughter floated up through the vents like music from a party I wasn't invited to. Later that night, Haley tapped once on my door and walked in without waiting. She held a wine glass in one hand and her tablet in the other. The event went great, she said, scrolling as she talked. Oh, and by the way, we're updating the Legacy Kitchen page to reflect the new direction. She didn't pause. Brendan's working with a design firm. You're okay with that, right? I didn't answer. She kept going. It's just cleaner, more professional. We'll still mention you, of course, in the About section. Briefly. That word hit harder than she realized. Briefly. As if 25 years of building, hustling, surviving could be tucked into one line next to a burger I never approved. She left without waiting for a response. The door stayed half open. I sat still long after she'd gone. But I didn't cry. Not that night. I reached for my old black ledger and started flipping pages. Recipe notes scrawled in pen, smudged with grease and memories. Margins filled with little things, reminders about birthdays. Notes on food costs. Emergency contacts scratched in with urgency. No one else would ever care about those details. But I did, because between those pages was a life. That night, it became clear. I hadn't just been pushed aside. I'd been written out of my own story. Founder turned footnote. Mother turned maid. And not one person had asked me if I agreed. A few days later, Brendan came home early. That was the first sign something was up. He didn't stop for almonds or take off his shoes. He walked straight to the table and laid down a manila folder like he was prepping for a boardroom pitch. I was chopping onions. The kitchen smelled like stew and thyme. He called my name like I was a receptionist. I wiped my hands, sat across from him, and waited. This is just clean-up paperwork, he said, mostly formality. Just updating the structure for efficiency. Haley's uncle helped with the legal side. I didn't reach for it. I just looked at him. His face was smooth, practiced, like he'd already rehearsed what to say. Then Haley showed up in the doorway, phone in hand, half pretending to text, fully watching me. She sat beside Brendan. We figured it's time, she said. Time to streamline things. Make it modern. I opened the folder. It wasn't cleanup. It was a takeover. Everything recipes, trademarks, brand rights transferred to a new company. Their company. There was a line offering me a small one-time payout, less than a single quarter's worth of royalties. My name wasn't listed as a founder, just a footnote, a historical figure. I turned page after page, felt the weight of every line press into my skin like betrayal in legal print. Brendan started to explain, but Haley cut him off. "There's no pressure," she said, "but the investors are waiting. We're opening in Austin and Seattle. They want clean lines, clean, that word again." I asked why my name had been removed. My voice wasn't angry, just hollow. Haley smiled like it was obvious. "Legacy isn't just about the past," she said. "It's about who carries it forward. People want fresh faces now, just branding." I closed the folder, stood up. "We'll revisit this later." Brendan looked relieved. Haley didn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I went downstairs and opened my laptop. I tried logging into the Legacy Kitchen business account. Access denied. Tried my personal credentials. Still locked out. The next morning, I called the bank. They told me I had been removed from the primary account 3 weeks ago. Brendan had filed the paperwork using a general power of attorney I'd given him years ago. I had forgotten it even existed. I opened the company email, bounced back, account deactivated. Then I checked the official website. The About page had a shiny new team photo, Brendan front and center. Haley beside him, grinning like she owned the place. New chefs lined the edges. My name was nowhere, not even a mention. I scrolled to the menu. None of the original recipes remained. No brisket sandwich named after my mother. No rosemary cornbread. No blackberry glazed ribs. Even the tagline had changed. Fresh fire, modern flavor. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, heart like stone in my chest. They hadn't just pushed me out of the business. They'd erased me from the food, from the story, from the memory. I looked down at my hands, still marked with faint burns from decades of cooking. My wrists still ached when it rained. My body remembered, even if they didn't. Later that week, Haley dropped a glossy new contract on the kitchen table next to my tea. "We thought maybe this version would feel more official," she said, smiling just enough to sting. "Something worthy of your signature." I told her I'd think about it. But the truth was, I already knew my answer, and I had already started planning my next move. Not loud, not vengeful, but precise, and rooted in everything they forgot I still had. That morning, I noticed something odd. My inbox was quiet, too quiet. No weekly sales report, no vendor updates. I sipped my coffee and tried the login again. Nothing. I reached out to our old IT contractor. He replied with one short sentence. "Access restricted at management's request." No name, no explanation, just a locked door where an open hallway used to be. Still, I wasn't ready to believe it. So I walked to the back room of the house where we stored hard copies of old filings. The drawer was gone. In its place was a new filing cabinet with a fresh lock. The key missing. I stood in front of it longer than I should have. Upstairs, I could hear Haley walking, confident. Heels sharp against the hardwood, like punctuation marks. That afternoon, I drove to the flagship location, the original one. I told myself I'd keep it casual, just check in. But the young hostess looked startled when I walked through the door. Her name tag said Sophia. She smiled like someone bracing for bad news. "I'm sorry," she said. "New access rules." You'll need to schedule a visit through management. I didn't argue. Didn't raise my voice. Just walked past her. The air inside felt colder than I remembered. New paint. New art. Different music. To something trendy and hollow. I looked for the old chalkboard menu behind the bar. Gone. So were the dishes. No Eastwood brisket. No Grandma Ginny's cobbler. Now it was smoked rustic fruit bake and house signature sandwich. It was like someone had scrubbed my name off every wall, every plate, every bite. I turned to the bartender, asked for a menu. He handed me a laminated printout with a shaky hand. Not a single dish remained that I'd written. Not even the foundation. Everything labeled house blend. It didn't feel like heartbreak. It felt like extinction. I walked to the back entrance, thinking maybe, just maybe, I could find one thing untouched. But the keypad code had been changed. A young staffer opened the door halfway and said he had to check with his supervisor. I nodded once, then left without a word. That night, I sat in the guest bedroom. My bedroom, the one tucked behind the laundry room. It used to be a storage closet. Now it had a lamp and a floral quilt, like that made it feel like home. I opened my laptop again. This time, I didn't bother with the restaurant systems. I tried checking my old business email, deactivated. I went to the state registry and pulled up the official records for Eastwood and Coton. The company name was still there, but the listed owners had changed. Brendan, Haley, my name was gone, no forwarding contact. No formal removal notice, just ... gone. I stared at the screen, barely blinking. Then I felt it, that cold edge settle in my chest like something had finally clicked into place. They hadn't just taken the business, they'd taken the memory of me with it. And they'd done it by the book, quietly, legally, completely. The next morning, I went to the courthouse. I asked for the public filings. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Are you authorized to request these?" I gave her my name. She hesitated, then disappeared into the back. When she returned, she handed me a packet held together by a rubber band. There was a yellow post-it on top. Transferred majority rights per internal agreement. Effective 10 weeks ago. 10 weeks. I had still been baking sweet potatoes and printing payroll checks. Still showing up every day. While my name had already been erased, I stepped outside. The courthouse steps felt steeper than they used to. My knees ached. My hands trembled just enough that I had to sit on the bench nearby. I stared out at the street for a long time. People walked past with coffee and errands and arguments. Life moved on. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my old recipe book. The leather was worn, the corners stained. Inside the front cover, I'd scribbled something years ago. Flavor is memory, name is soul. I ran my fingers over the ink. They took both from me, but not forever. That night, the wind rattled through the old window frames like it had something to say. I'd always loved winter storms. They reminded me of what it meant to endure. But that night, the cold didn't feel cleansing. It felt like the silence that had seeped into my son's house. The next evening, Haley hosted a dinner for the restaurant's core team. She called it a tradition. Funny I didn't remember it ever being one. She orchestrated every detail like a stage play. Cream blouse, gold earrings, wine glass in hand. Brendan helped set the table. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, just lined up forks like he was trying to control something that had already unraveled. I made my sweet potato casserole. No one asked me to. But I couldn't just stand by while strangers chopped vegetables in the kitchen I once commanded. I layered cinnamon and brown sugar, crushed pecans by hand, and baked it until golden. I set it on the table without a word. When dinner began, Haley stood at the head like she was queen of the whole operation. Brendan sat on her right. I was at the far end, near the pantry. The table buzzed with talk of menus, brand refreshes, market trends. A young woman named Danielle mentioned changing the winter specials. Haley raised her glass. "We've come a long way from comfort food," she said with a twinkle in her voice. "We're aiming for something modern now. It's time we grew out of those dusty roots." There were polite chuckles. She glanced toward my end of the table. "That means letting go of dishes that no longer reflect who we are." The words landed like a cold draft. My casserole sat untouched, steam curling upward like it still had hope. Brendan looked down at his plate. His fork trembled slightly. No one said a thing. No one looked my way. After dinner, when the wine started flowing and the dessert tray came out, I quietly excused myself. Upstairs, I lit the lamp on my knitstand. Its soft yellow glow stretched across the room like an old friend. I pulled out the brown notebook I'd used since our food truck days. I flipped to the back, the pages not filled with recipes, but with memories, documented proof, dates, locations, moments. February 3rd, Haley introduced me to a vendor as just Brendan's mom. March 17th, my brisket renamed Chef's Choice. April 12th, Brendan asked me to stop attending staff meetings because it confused people. August 28th, my office at the downtown location was emptied. No warning. And now, November 14th, called sentimental baggage at dinner in my own house. I stared at the page. Then I picked up my pen. Tonight, I remembered my name. I wrote it slowly, pressing hard, not just the one on the papers they'd erased. The real one, Virginia Eastwood, founder, builder. Woman who flipped ribs over open flame with a baby on her hip. I sat in that room with the wind against the window, and for the first time in a long time, I felt steady. I turned the page and began something new. It started with a list. On one side, I wrote everything they took. The brand, the recipes, the name on the door, the rights, the access, the history. On the other side, I listed what they didn't know I still had. Original trademark filings, handwritten branding notes in my father's script, multiple versions of our LLC documents from the day we first incorporated, and something else, a letter Geraldine had helped me draft years ago, back when I was forced into a buyout on my second location. She'd told me keep a backup for the day they forget who bled for this. I smiled at the memory, not because I felt victorious, but because I finally felt awake. I lit a candle on the knitstand, laid my notebook beside it, watched the flame flicker against the window like it recognized me. The next morning, the house was quiet. Sunlight poured into the kitchen like it didn't know anything had changed. By noon, the sharp click of Haley's heels echoed through the halls. She entered holding a folder thick with fresh paperwork. Brendan followed, expression hollow, like a man trapped in his own silence. Haley dropped the folder on the table. "This is the final version," she said. "Clean, updated, everyone's protected." She didn't look at me, just waited. Brendan pulled out a chair, motioned for me to sit. I stayed standing. I flipped through the pages, slow clause after clause, each one slicing away at what remained. Transfer of intellectual property, surrender of equity claims, Assignment of real estate assets under dispute. It wasn't a contract. It was an execution. She paced behind me, arms crossed, fingers tapping her sleeve. This ensures a smooth transition, she said. I looked up. Voice calm. What transition would that be? She scoffed. You stepping down. You retiring gracefully. You not haunting the company like a bad memory. Her words were ice, polished, practiced. Wounding without a raised voice, I set the folder back on the table. No, just that one word. Haley blinked. Then something in her broke. Her face tightened. She moved so fast I didn't see it coming. She grabbed the mop from the pantry corner and struck me across the back. The sound echoed off the tile. I staggered, but stayed standing. She swung again, this time across my shoulder. Brendan barely reacted. What are you doing? He said, flatly. Not alarmed, not outraged, just distant. The mop slipped from her hand, clattered to the floor. You don't get to say no, she hissed. Not anymore. I didn't speak, didn't flinch. I picked up the mop, leaned it gently against the wall. Not for her, for myself. Brendan didn't meet my eyes. His hand hovered over his phone, but he never dialed. I turned toward the stairs. She yelled after me. You think walking away makes you right? I didn't answer. I walked slowly, one step at a time. My joints throbbed from the blows. But the ache wasn't what stayed with me. It was the betrayal, not just from her, from him. When I reached my room, I sat down and opened the notebook, wrote one clean sentence. December 3rd. She raised a mop like a weapon. Brendan watched. I stared at the page until the words stopped shaking, until they became just ink. Downstairs, I heard a drawer slam shut. Later that evening, I passed Brendan in the hallway. He didn't say a word. Opened his mouth for a second, then closed it again. Before he disappeared into his room, he left something on the hallway table, the photograph. Old and faded, but unmistakable. Brendan, maybe 10 years old, standing in front of our first food truck, holding a spatula like a trophy. I was behind him, flower on my cheek, smiling like I owned the sky. There was no note, just the photo. I didn't touch it, left it exactly where he placed it. That night, I didn't light a candle. I didn't open the notebook. I just lay in the dark with the curtains drawn and the silence loud. Some storms don't come with thunder, but you still feel them. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I didn't take a suitcase. Just a canvas tote with one folder and my notebook zipped in the front pocket. My shoulders ached, but the pain felt distant now, like it had settled in a place I no longer carried up front. I drove across town, through the quiet streets of East Richmond. Most of it had changed, but one storefront remained the same. Green awning, faded sign, Shaw and Boyd, attorneys at law. I knocked twice and let myself in. The bell above the door gave off the same soft chime it always had. Geraldine Shaw still wore the same gray suits like armor. Hair in a bun that warned you not to waste her time. She didn't smile when she saw me, just nodded once and pointed to the seat across from her. I sat. We didn't speak for a long time. Then she reached into her bottom drawer and pulled out a thick leather binder. Been waiting for you, she said. I blinked. You knew I'd come. She looked at me like that was the dumbest question I could have asked. We both leaned over the binder. Inside were copies of every document I'd ever signed for Fork and Flame, trademarks, Licensing. Menus. The original operating agreement from our first pop-up, back when Brendan was still learning how to light a grill. I never shredded a thing, she said, just in case they forgot whose name built that place. I turned each page slowly. Some ink had faded, but every line was still clear. Every signature was mine, not Brendan's, not Haley's. I closed the binder. I want to dissolve it, I said. All of it. Strip it clean. Start again. Geraldine didn't blink. She leaned back, tapped her pen once on the desk. We can. It'll take work, but it's all here. You never legally transferred control. They've been operating on assumptions, not law. I nodded. Let that truth sink in deep. I hadn't just been erased. I'd let it happen, quietly, assuming no one would notice. Now I had the proof, the power, and the right. Geraldine looked up from the binder. What do you want to do with the assets? That's when I told her about the notebook I'd been keeping. About the women I'd met over the years, cooks, servers, line managers. Women who trained the next generation, only to be pushed aside for being too old, too slow, too loud. Women who carried restaurants on their backs, then got sent home with a gift card and a forced smile. I want to turn it into a fund, I said, a non-profit for women over 50 who were silenced, forgotten, or betrayed, especially by people they once lifted up. Geraldine's eyes sharpened. That's not revenge, she said. That's justice. We spent the rest of the morning outlining it, line by line. I signed over the rights to the original logos and naming. We refiled the corporation under a different name. She made a call to someone at the state office. I made a list of dishes I wanted to give away, not just food, memories. By noon, the paper trail had turned. Fork and Flame was no longer mine, because I had chosen to become something else, director of the Heartlight Foundation. It felt like surfacing from deep underwater. Before I left, Geraldine pulled out one more folder. They've been quietly listing your house as a future business asset, she said. Buried it inside a shell clause in the updated bylaws. But they never recorded it correctly, so it's still mine. I said ... She nodded ... For now. But you need to move quickly. They've stopped playing fair. I stood up, looked around the office. Same blinds, same desk where I once sat 25 years ago with flour on my apron and barbecue smoke in my hair. Thank you, I told her. She waved it off. You're the one who fed 300 union guys during a blackout. This is the easy part. Outside, the wind was picking up. The sky wasn't clear, but it wasn't empty either. I had walked in as a woman they thought was finished. I walked out as someone they never should have underestimated. By the following Monday, we were back in her office, sleeves rolled up, unraveling the legal structure piece by piece. Fork and Flame began to dissolve. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like cleaning out a garden that hadn't seen daylight in years. Some roots resisted, others came loose without a fight. The business I'd built with burnt knuckles and borrowed money was never about buzzwords or sleek branding. It was about dignity, comfort, a hot plate handed across a counter by someone who cared. Geraldine filed the voluntary dissolution paperwork. I signed each page. Every signature wiped away a piece of control Brendan and Haley thought they owned. But I wasn't doing this for them anymore. I was doing it for every woman who'd ever been told she was past her prime. We called the new entity the Heartlight Foundation. The name came from a line I scribbled years ago in my recipe book. Home isn't a roof. It's the hand that remembers how to season a pot even when it shakes. Geraldine read it twice and nodded. That's the heart of it, she said. I agreed. By the end of the week, every document was signed and sealed. We transferred the trademarks, archived menus, and old press photos to the foundation, even the name Fork and Flame. Geraldine brought in a third-party firm to manage the financial handoffs. Keep everything clean. Keep it irreversible. We worked late that Friday. Her office lights were the last ones glowing on the street. She spread the final papers across the desk. One section outlined the foundation's mission. Simple, raw, and polished. Just how I wanted it. To support women aged 50 and over who've been betrayed personally or professionally. To provide retraining, legal guidance, emotional grounding. To restore dignity through food, through work, through community. That was the last page I signed. The next morning, we met at an old warehouse where I used to host neighborhood cookouts. It had been empty for years. Dusty floors, rusted beams, but it still had bones. Geraldine knew someone who could fast-track permits and basic renovations. We decided the space would become a learning kitchen, a shared pantry, a place to gather, cook, cry, heal. Nothing fancy, nothing branded, just real. We painted the front door a soft, dusty red. On the first day, I hung a black and white photo near the entrance. Me and Reber, 1974. Both of us in aprons, both of us laughing. I didn't put it in a frame. Just pinned it to twine with clothespins. It felt more honest that way. Over the next few days, 3 women came to volunteer. One had run a roadside diner in North Carolina. One had managed a hotel kitchen in Arizona until her son replaced her with someone younger. Another had taught culinary classes for 20 years until the college decided she was too traditional. Different stories. Same wound. That night I stayed late. The space was quiet. I sat at a butcher block table and opened my old leather-bound notebook. The one with grease stains and ink smears. Every page held a name, a dish, a moment. Some of the women were gone now. Some I hadn't seen in decades, but their hands had shaped mine. Their stories weren't finished. I copied a list from the back of the notebook and pinned it to the corkboard. At the top, I wrote, who we're doing this for. Beneath it just first names, Agnes, Ruth, Dolores, Martha, Bernardine. I didn't add mine, not yet. Not until I'd earned the right to stand beside them again. Geraldine walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to me, didn't say much, just stared at the list. You think they'll see it? She asked. I looked around the empty space, still bare, still echoing, but I could already hear the laughter, the aprons swaying, the pans clinking. They will, I said, not with their eyes, but in the hands we reach, in the meals we serve. We sat there for a long time, just 2 old women who refused to disappear quietly. Later that night, I added something else to the wall, a small wooden plaque cut from reclaimed oak. It read, "From the hands that built, to the hands still building." That was our legacy now. Not a brand, not a restaurant, a flame passed forward. And for the first time in a long while, I felt warm again. The morning of the press conference, I woke before the alarm, not out of nerves, out of instinct. Years in kitchens had trained my body to rise before the sun. I brewed coffee, nothing fancy, just warm and steady, and stepped onto the porch of my little rental duplex. The sky was still deciding whether to be gold or gray. By 9 a.m., headlines had started to appear. Slow at first, then steady, then everywhere. Virginia Eastwood walks away from Fork and Flame, founds nonprofit for women over 50. Culinary matriarch smokes out betrayal or reclaims legacy on her terms. Eastwood leaves Haley, and Brendan's rebrand in ashes. Geraldine had called in a favor from a reporter she trusted. Leah, from the Des Moines Journal, a woman who didn't chase gossip, she chased the truth. Her piece was first. No flair, no drama, just facts. Timeline, filings, quotes ... at the end. She included something I'd told her on the phone. They took my name off the menu, so I built a new table. By 10 a.m., Brendan and Haley were on stage at their rebrand launch. A glossy event space filled with food influencers, cameras, and carefully selected lighting. They had planned it for weeks. Hired a PR firm, sent out custom gift boxes. They expected applause. Instead, the air was thick with something else. You could see it in the photos. Brendan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Haley looked like someone had pulled the plug seconds before the cameras rolled. Behind them, the screen said Fork and Flame 2.0 in shiny metallic font. But in the crowd, phones buzzed. People were whispering, reading. Leah's article was spreading, fast. By the time Haley started her opening remarks, two journalists had already left their seats. One headline updated in real time. Eastwood confirms no ownership in new brand. Then came a video clip. A woman in the crowd live-streamed the moment Brendan was asked if I'd be involved moving forward. He hesitated, long enough to make the silence louder than any answer. Then he said, "She gave us her blessing. That lie didn't survive the hour." By noon, another piece dropped with photos of me and Geraldine in front of the warehouse. We stood under the red door, beside a chalkboard sign that read, "The Hearthlight Foundation, opening soon." I wore my denim apron, the one with the burn mark near the pocket. Same one from that old photo with Reba. That detail made it into the caption. Comments started rolling in. Some defended Brendan. Families are messy, they said. Others didn't hold back. They called Haley ruthless. Said the rebrand felt hollow, but I didn't linger in the comments. I knew how sharp public opinion could be, and I'd already been cut deep enough. That evening, Geraldine and I went back to the foundation space. She didn't say much, just handed me the latest copy of * Midwest Kitchen and Craft *. They'd picked up the story for their print issue. On the last page was a small column titled Recipes Reclaimed. Beneath it was one of mine, molasses cornbread with toasted oats. The write-up ended with a note. A dish that doesn't need a restaurant to matter, just a memory and a little heat. We sat in the quiet. The old smoker out back still smelled faintly of mesquite and char. Later that night, a few women trickled in. One brought scones. Another brought her granddaughter who wanted to help organize shelves. The world didn't shift. There was no dramatic moment. But something had changed. Something real. After sunset, I stepped outside, stood beside the smoker, #2. I lit a match and touched it to the kindling. The fire caught slow, the smoke rose steady. Behind me, the red door stood open. Inside, the light was golden and low. Not perfect, not polished, but ours. That was the day my name stopped being a brand. It became something more, a beacon. 2 days later, I came home from the foundation to find an envelope waiting on my porch. No return address. No stamps. Just my name in careful handwriting. Inside was a photo. A woman standing behind an old food truck. Her hands planted on the counter like they'd been there 1,000 mornings. Apron smudged with flour. Eyes proud but tired. Tucked into the fold was a letter, written on yellow legal paper. Neat cursive. Heavy pressure. I unfolded it. Dear Miss Eastwood, my name is Alma Delaney. I live in Waco, Texas. My daughter sent me your article with a note that said, Mama, you need to see this. I'm 68 years old, and I've never written a letter like this in my life. But something in your story rattled loose a memory I'd packed away like an old pan to crack to fix, but to love to throw out. I used to run a little diner, Alma's Table, opened it with my husband in '82. We served breakfast and pie, nothing fancy. Biscuits from scratch, coffee brewed strong. It paid for braces, prom dresses, and 1 lemon of a Chevy. 10 years ago, my son married a woman named Gina. She had big ideas for the place. Said she'd take care of us and keep it in the family. Once the papers were signed, everything changed. My husband got sick. I had to step away for a while. When I came back, the locks were changed. The name on the window was gone. She renamed it Gina's Grill, kept my cinnamon rolls, started calling them Texas Twists. Said my handmade table had termites. I found it broken in half behind the dumpster. I never got to say goodbye to my place. Never got to serve one last breakfast. I paused there, took a breath. The words stung like truth. Then I kept reading. For a while, I thought maybe I deserved it. That I hadn't fought hard enough. That maybe women like us were only meant to start things, not finish them. But then I read about you. How you didn't just walk away. You turned everything they buried into something new. Not out of anger, out of belief. That stirred something in me. So here's what I'm doing. Next month, I'm dragging my old camper out of the shed. The tires are shot and the roof leaks, but the griddle still works. My granddaughter said she'd help me repaint it. We're calling it Alma's again. Just breakfast, 3 mornings a week. Nothing flashy, but this time it's mine. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to say thank you. You reminded me that something still burns in here. You gave me proof that even after the kitchen's gone cold, we still get to cook. With respect, Alma. I sat there with the letter in my lap for a long time. Sunlight came in soft through the blinds, traced quiet lines across the floor like time itself was slowing down to let me feel this. I looked at the photo again. Alma's hands said it all. Worn, strong, unapologetic. The kind of hands that feed people long after anyone remembers to thank them. I pinned the letter on the corkboard in my foundation office, right next to the blueprint for our teaching kitchen. Then I placed the photo in the drawer with my recipe cards. That's where it belonged. I didn't cry, not then. But I felt something loosen in my chest, like a door unlatched. The next morning, I wrote back. Just a short note. No poetry. I told her Alma's again was the perfect name. Told her not to change the cinnamon rolls one bit. And if she ever needed a second opinion on her coffee, I was only a state away. That letter reminded me why this mattered. This wasn't about taking back what they stole. It was about showing other women that the story didn't end just because someone else closed the book. Sometimes, all we need is to be reminded the pen is still in our hands. The knock came just after 6. No call, no text. Just the sound of knuckles on wood soft, but certain. I opened the door. Brendan stood there. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Collar wrinkled, eyes sunken, hands behind his back like a schoolboy caught cheating. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like his shoes were made of cement. He didn't sit, just hovered near the window, staring out like the trees had changed shape. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than I remembered. Rough. He said he'd read the article. Said people were asking questions. Said some clients had pulled out of press events. I listened, didn't nod, didn't flinch. Just let his words settle in the room like smoke. He said he never thought it would go this way. That he assumed I'd just fade out, move somewhere quiet, start gardening, disappear. He said my silence over the years made him think I'd stay silent forever. I sat down, not because I was tired, because I wanted to be grounded. I told him I had heard every word he never said. Every time he let Haley speak for both of them. Every time he avoided my eyes. Every time he chose ease over integrity. He didn't interrupt. Didn't defend Haley. Didn't defend himself. Finally, he pulled something from behind his back. A photograph, edges worn, color faded. It was us, me and him, standing in front of our first food truck. I was holding the first order slip, grinning like a fool. He was maybe 12, spatula in hand like it was a medal. He placed it gently on the table between us, said he found it in a storage box I'd asked him to move years ago. Said he didn't know why he brought it, only that it felt right. I looked at it. Felt that old ache, the kind that comes when memory hits as hard as grief. I told him I used to believe he was carrying my legacy, that I'd passed him something sacred. But now I realized he had let someone else rename it, reshape it, strip it. And in doing that, he didn't just silence me. He lost himself too. Brendan finally sat. His voice cracked when he said he was scared. That he didn't know how to be both a son and a businessman. That Haley made decisions fast, sharp, and he just let her take the wheel because it was easier than facing me, easier than facing the past. I let him speak. And when he finished, I said one sentence, not with anger, not with triumph. You chose Haley. He nodded. A small, broken nod, the kind that comes when a truth finally lands, and there's nowhere left to run. We sat in silence for a while. Not tense, not soft, just honest. He stood up, asked if he could take the photo with him. I said no, that photo was my memory, too. At the door, he looked back like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He just walked out and closed the door behind him. I stood there, holding the photo. It didn't hurt. Not the way I thought it would. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like space, like something had moved out of the way to make room for what came next. The sun had already begun to dip when I rolled out Old Faithful. That smoker had been with me longer than most people. First big investment I ever made. Back before there was a restaurant. Back when Brendan still needed help tying his shoes. Through every renovation, every move, every rebrand, I kept it tucked in the corner of my garage, waiting. We sat up in the backyard. Geraldine arrived first. She brought her favorite fold-out chair and a tin of cornbread. Placed it gently on the long table like it meant something. It did. Then came Linda, who used to run the front counter at our diner before her divorce appended everything. And Cynthia, who handled kitchen logistics until cancer took her husband and the restaurant took her job. Each of them carried a version of being discarded, each of them now rebuilding from scratch. Not for pity, not for charity. For dignity. For themselves. The firewood hissed when I closed the lid on the ribs. That scent slow and smoky wrapped around us like a memory. No one talked much at first. We set the table, uncorked 2 bottles of cheap red wine, turned on the old radio I used to keep by the prep sink. The music crackled, a little bluegrass, a little Patsy Cline, same soundtrack I used to hum during cleanup after midnight. When the ribs were done, I sliced them myself. No servers, no menus, no branding, just food, hot, honest, and handed over by someone who understood what it meant to be forgotten and keep going anyway. We ate slow, let time stretch. The air was thick with summer quiet, the kind that presses down and reminds you you're still here. I looked around the table. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. I had tried to hand down a legacy. Instead, I built a new one. Not out of contracts or franchises. But out of names, out of laughter, out of hands that still remembered how to season a pot even when they shook. As the sky turned violet, we lit a few candles. I watched the flames flicker against the curve of their glasses, saw the lines on their faces catch the light just right. No one asked for forgiveness. No one gave a speech. We weren't there to explain ourselves. We had stopped waiting for permission to exist. Behind us, Old Faithful crackled low and steady. I stood up and added one more log. The smoke curled toward the sky. You don't need your name on a menu to be remembered. Some things are passed on by taste, by warmth, by a woman who refuses to stay quiet, a woman who lights the fire again. And if this story finds you sitting in your own silence, if you've been erased, ignored, or quietly pushed aside, let this be your reminder. You are not gone. You are not finished. You don't need a title to matter. And somewhere out there, someone is lighting a fire. One that remembers exactly who you are. A few days later, I received another letter, not from Alma. This one came from a girl named Tasha. She was 24. Said she was raised by her grandmother, who used to cook Sunday suppers for half their neighborhood in Detroit. Tasha said she'd been feeling lost, left culinary school, working nights at a chain restaurant where no one remembered her name. She read about Hearthlight. Said it gave her a reason to try again. She wanted to volunteer. Said she didn't care if she started by peeling potatoes or folding aprons. She just wanted to be near the kind of women who had stories in their hands. That letter meant more than any award I ever got. I pinned it right next to Alma's. The board was getting full now. Notes, photos, receipts, handwritten recipes in different kinds of ink. Each one a life, each one a reminder. We weren't building a business anymore. We were building memory. Not the kind you find in archives or articles, the kind that moves through kitchens and stays in the air like spice. Every time someone new walks through our red door, I ask the same question. What was the first thing you ever cooked for someone you loved? They always pause, then they smile, then they remember. And just like that, they're no longer invisible. They're part of the fire, part of the flavor, part of the foundation. So if you're reading this and your name has been scrubbed from something you built, if your voice was muted in a place you once led, if someone tried to turn your history into a footnote, come find us. We saved you a seat, and the stove is still warm.